to that are the interactions and relationships between organisms and their environment. That is the basis of ecology. We can talk about science as a rational approach to observing and explaining the world around us. We can talk about biology as the study of life. Ecology then is the study of the relationships between organisms and their environments. And we're going to see that in just a couple minutes. It takes on a whole bunch of variety of different scales. And this is the classic blue marble picture that the astronauts took on some of their first trips around and onto the moon, where for the first time humanity got to look back at Earth and see it as a whole perspective in a very different viewpoint than we had ever had before. This summer was the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing. And it's really phenomenal that we've only had this kind of global perspective, the ability to really study global ecology, landscape ecology, really for the last 45 to 30 years. This is new techniques. This is new integration of information that we've been doing for a long time in some cases to answer really different questions. And so in your first homework assignment, hopefully you'll gain an appreciation that ecology is a relatively new field, and that lots of the stuff that we're doing and learning, you're gonna be like, duh, I know that when there's more resources, female deer produce more babies. You're like, that makes total sense. But you gotta go out and do the experiment. And like, guess what? That experiment was like just done, okay? So there's lots of low-hanging fruit here in ecology that we can talk about. Some stuff that you're gonna be like, yes, of course that makes sense. I know that if you're camouflaged, there's less predation. Let me show you the data that gives you that basic understanding of the world around us. At the same time, we're ready to ask the next level questions. Okay, how long does it take a species to adapt camouflage when its ecosystem is changing around it? What factors affect evolutionary rates that lead to changes in interactions between organisms, whether it's within a population or between populations of organisms? Okay. Our textbook gives us an even more kind of detailed definition of ecology. It's the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of organisms and interactions that determine the distribution and abundance of those organisms and interactions. And this is where ecology evolution become this kind of ever interacting loop. This definition is rather circular, okay? It's also vague, which means that lots of topics fall under the category of ecology and evolution, but it is, in its inherent understanding of it, this interplay of interactions in organisms with their environment. And as organisms are in their environment, they change that environment, which changes the interaction for those organisms. And so it's continuous and constantly happening around us. And that when we do an experiment and we find out an answer in one environment, we can hypothesize that might be general to lots of interactions and environments, but we have to still study that and get an understanding, and there might be variations in different environments that are unique to those environments. We can look at the fossil record and determine interactions and species distributions, but those same factors, 65 million years ago are different on the environmental scale than what they are today. And so even though we can have generalizations, the specificity and the specifics of things can be really interesting and important. And so again, we're going to cover lots of these generalities, but we're going to talk about, for terms of an exam, it's black or it's white, you have the answer or you don't. But another part of understanding ecology and evolution is recognizing that it's a gradient for almost everything we're going to talk about. We're going to show you the textbook examples of these things in order to teach base principles. Then you've got to go apply those principles, and you may find yourself somewhere in the middle. And that's what's actually most interesting, is when it doesn't fit the black or white definition, when it's a little bit of both, or it's a third or fourth something that we haven't encountered before. But you don't know unless you go and look. Okay? And that's where the scientific study part comes in. And we'll talk a lot about, as I mentioned, the scientific method and kind of practicing with it. It's when we start off in lab class on Friday. We're going to do a ton of stuff with different types of organisms. I'm really excited that the guest speaker that I have coming for us is the Cincinnati Zoo, and they're going to bring us animals. And I don't know what we're going to do with them. I hope we get to play with them, my personal opinion. I'm going to invite my environmental studies students to join us on that day. I think it's like the 19th of September. Hopefully we'll get to interact with lots of organisms in the environment as we're out there. It's going to be easiest to interact with plants because they're stationary and they can't run away from you. but we're going to do our best to capture some invertebrates to get you a chance to have some hands-on experience. Keeping in mind that our interaction with these organisms is one of their myriad of interactions that organism has in its daily life. And that's what we want to talk about and experiment with in lecture and lab this semester. Those interactions are, to me, kind of the basis of what's different about ecology than just straight up biology. In biology, we can go through the biodiversity of organisms. We can talk about all these different phyla. I can tell you all the different parts of a cell and how that builds into these organisms. In ecology, then, we want to talk about how those organisms interact with each other, with different types of organisms then outside their species and with their environment. And then that feedback loop of how their environment affects them and they affect their environment. And then it goes on as we start to talk about these time scales. Okay. Does anybody recognize this caterpillar? I don't expect you to. Start that on. My understanding is that this is a gypsy moth caterpillar, and gypsy moths are an invasive species that has been really detrimental to some of the forests on the east coast of the United States. And so the distribution and abundance of this organism in the United States is very different than where it came from in Europe because of the different environment interactions that it finds itself in these two different places on the sides of the Atlantic Ocean. In Europe, not a big problem, normal part of the forest ecosystem. Here, we want to eradicate these things because they're disrupting the normal, what we consider the normal interactions and ecosystem functions in our forests. I don't know why it's colored the way it is. To me, that's an interesting question. I don't know.
Why is it invasive here?
It's invasive here because its natural predators are missing. And so there aren't many organisms here that eat it, if any. And so they've just had this population explosion because nothing is controlling their population numbers, which means that they eat way more of what they eat, which is trees, than they should. And so then they have this problem of killing trees, where they don't normally do that in Europe because the predators eat them and eat the larvae. I don't know why our birds and other kind of predation insects don't find them tasty, but they just don't. Okay, cool. All right. In ecology, we're going to talk and experiment a lot this semester with these two different ways of doing ecology. And this, again, is something that you may have encountered in biology class before and some of your science classes. We talk about pure or basic ecology is when we're doing a basic understanding of the world around us. How might the two gentlemen in our picture here be doing basic ecology or pure ecology with this lioness that they have tranquilized?
Lion not been tranquilized would be a different interaction.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like that, they're able to touch it, they're able to pet it, they're able to study it.
Good. And that's really basic. Like, what is their coat composition texture like? What is her weight? How long is she? How old do we think she is? What is the quality of her teeth? How big are her ears? How many toes does she have? That's basic understanding of the way that a lion works, okay? Is she pregnant or not? Does it appear that she's nursing? How many cubs do we see running around on the edges of this? Or male lions? Does she appear to be part of the group? That's just a basic understanding of what it is to be a lion, to be like a lion, to have a lion interacting with their environment. That's basic knowledge that we can get. How many of them there are, how big they are they, where do they move through in their territory or ecosystem. The basic and pure ecology or biology is something that is generally pretty easy for us to do. We can take our basic measurement tools, which sometimes are just our five senses, and we can get data and information about something so we have a better understanding of the world around us. Many times, though, what we want to do is to be doing applied ecology or applied biology or applied science. And then that's when we use these basics to benefit usually humanity. Okay, we're doing this science not just to know and understand, but to help ourselves as humans or populations or the ecosystem around us. So how could those same things that these two gentlemen are doing with this animal be not only pure and basic biology, but applied biology or ecology?
Was like he's taking blood or something of some sort. So he could be comparing it, seeing if that line is related to some, or how it's similar to lines in a different area or what.
Good. And why would that information be important?
See how they're spreading, see if they're affecting each other how they should be, if they're operating and creating a healthy ecosystem, or if things like if their numbers are dwindling down, if they're not related.
Good.
Tell.
Okay. We take that basic information, our genetics, how much gene flow we think there is in this population, maybe where we've seen this lioness in other places, so that we kind of know about their territory. And it's not just that we know that, but now that we're concerned if it's a healthy population, if the population is declining, if this is a normal interaction. Okay. It's that kind of value to the information that makes it applied. Now we can take this basic information just about the size, weight, genetics of this organism, and we can start to do stuff about species management plans or population management or landscape diversity, impacts of humans on this ecosystem or this particular, just starting with this one organism that we have tranquilized. That's the applied part, where we take it and we use that information for a purpose beyond just knowing about that organism or that particular ecosystem. In the most cases in ecology, we're really concerned about management and protecting, preserving stuff. So lots of ecology overlaps with conservation biology. We're trying to manage small or declining populations to keep them from extinction, to increase genetic diversity. And lots of that is actually like government work, where we're managing a species for its endangered species plan, and a species management plan. A lot of times, this work also has a lot of application for agriculture, and that our understanding of plant interactions, insect interactions, predator interactions, allows us to manage lands in order to grow food in one way or another for people. And that's applied ecology. Our understanding of plant competition, our understanding of pollination services, takes our basic knowledge of the world and lets us apply it in a way that's hopefully really useful, okay? And that's again where I want us to try to get, is that I can teach you tools, I can teach you information that's very basic, and that's extraordinarily worthwhile. Without it, we can't do the applied stuff. Okay, lots of times we want to jump in and start doing applied science that has a lot of usefulness, that lets us develop a treatment for a disease. Like, we have to know the basics of what causes that disease at the genetic, the molecular level before we can develop a treatment that's going to be effective. Is everybody with me? There's these like two things. Okay. And so again, in lab, we're going to be in the mud doing the basic science, with the understanding that the reason we're doing this and asking these questions is to actually benefit ourselves or the organisms, ecosystems around us. All right, the last two things I want to mention before I send you out into the world and have you come back on Thursday are just a reminder that ecology, as I mentioned, has all these interacting scales, and that ecology and the study of biology is one of hierarchies. And the first one is that we have these interacting physical scales, spatial scales of study, okay? And the course is organized around this. We're going to talk about individuals, okay, individual beings, and some of their evolution and genetics. Then we're going to be talking about populations, conglomerations of individuals of the same species. The next level up is to have populations of all the individuals of one species that are together, and those species now start interacting with other species, different types of organisms, and their abiotic environment. And that's where we get to the community level. And once we understand species and populations, then we can really do some cool stuff at the community landscape level. But it's a higher level. You have to look at a bigger geographic region to encompass the community than usually the region you have to look at for a population or the individual territory of one particular individual. And so you get this hierarchy of increasing scales as we kind of move up in these terms, in this terminology. The biggest, of course, geographic scale is that of the biosphere, the ecosystem, where we're looking about, big continental scales, big regions north to south or east to west that all have the same type of biome, the same type of communities. And then we see what happens when we start mixing biomes together or biomes start moving across landscapes on geologic timescales. Those are also really interesting questions, and those are the questions that we need to ask if we're going to talk about climate change. You can't talk about climate change and landscape ecology if you don't know what species are there, and those species are very dependent upon the individual interactions within those species. So you can ask individual questions at each of these scales, but then they're also interconnected. And to design a well-designed experiment, sometimes you have to keep it very simple and ask a very specific question in the hopes that you can start to address some of those higher level questions. So that's the geologic scale, individual kind of territory, all the way up to what we see in terms of interacting communities at the landscape ecosystem scale. Then we can start talking about the biosphere, things that are swept by usually the wind and the waves between different ecosystems. And the other interacting scale of study is that of time. Okay. We're going to look at individuals and at cells and what's happening on the second-to-second basis. That affects that individual's growth and reproduction, which happens on a day-to-day or seasonal basis. How that organism grows and reproduces seasonally has an impact on what that population does year to year over time. What that population does year to year over time affects the landscape ecology, what resources are used, how water flows across an ecosystem, how many nutrients are available so other species grow or decline over time. And so we can look at things that happen really quickly, and that's what we're going to do in this class because we have 3 hours to look at something and see something. But we have these interacting timescales that we have to keep in mind, and that the organisms that we're going to be interacting with are going to do something quickly so we can observe it. But other organisms might do those same things on a much longer timescale. And lots of times that's the basic difference between heterotrophic animals and autotrophic plants. And animals do it fast and quick and dirty, and plants are just as dirty and sometimes just as fast, but some of them are really slow. And that's true of some animals too. But it's interacting, and that affects how they interact with each other, how they interact with their environment, how their environment interacts back to them. A bacteria has a very different relationship with its environment than does an elephant. And the environment likewise has a different interaction with bacteria than with an elephant. Okay, cool. We'll talk a little bit more. We'll get into the ton of this abiotic, the non-living environment. That's where we're going to start with resources and conditions in terms of class on Thursday. The last thing I want to ask you guys to do today is to turn in your introductory worksheet. That's not a big deal. We're in chapters 1 and chapters 2 of our textbook. So I've done some of this basic, what is ecology? What are these scales of ecology? It's the first part of chapter 1. We're going to look at the scientific method, which is the second part of chapter 1 in class on Friday. Never feel that you need to bring your book to class, okay? If I'm like, oh, we're answering this question, I will have it for you. If I'm like, let's look at this figure together and answer some questions, I will give you the figure, okay? So even though on the schedule it says we're associated with different parts of the chapter, I will, if we're doing something very specific in class with the textbook, I will give you that. On Tuesday, I'm going to start talking about climate, which is the abiotic big picture, chapter 2 of our text. Okay. It does help, and I do often ask the end of chapter questions in class. And so if you glance at those, you may see that they pop up on the slides and we get to talk about them. And so if you have read the chapter and thought about answering the questions before class, we'll have a more productive class. Okay, I don't know if they're doing it this semester. I forgot to check before class. You may need to log on to either to Blackboard, which is what our class is based on this semester, and make sure that you click a little attendance verification. If I have to do that, I will of course verify that you have been in class. But in previous semesters, you had to go on and like log on and show that you're like an active student. So I'll check on that and make sure on Thursday to remind you. Okay.
Do you need a book for like 2 semesters?
This is the 1 semester class. So I think yes for fall. In spring, 2084C is cell biology, and I'm almost sure you have a different text for cell than we have for ecology. All right, that's it. I'm done. I'll see you on Thursday. I'll take your worksheet.
And